Department Land Management's webinar. And thank you for being here with us today. So before we get started, I would like to introduce our speaker, Dr. Tan Ngai Paing. Dr. Tan Ngai Paing is a faculty member in the Department of Land Management, Faculty of Agriculture, UPM. Dr. Tan received his training in soil science in both Malaysia, Bachelor and Master, and Japan, Master and PhD. So at present, he gives lectures and conducts research on topics related to soils and crop growth. Current research areas including effective use of urea fertilizers, direct application of phosphate rocks, recycling potassium from tree to soils. So his title for our webinar today is Know Your Fertilizer, right? So a bit information on his title. The world demand for wool and fiber today is not just about quantity, but also food diversity and nutrition content. So, but pressure on growing diverse crops to meet these demands requires us to maximize, even risking overburdening our soil for agricultural production. So with better knowledge and technological advancement, however, we have learned how to better manage our soils to be more fertile, particularly using chemical fertilizers. Yet, many remain doubtful about the quality and safety of food produced using fertilizers and the sustainability of these fertilizers on the environment. So in this webinar, we will slow down memory lane and learn about the development of fertilizers and how they affect humanity. So, all right, Dr. Tan, without delaying any further, I would like to welcome Dr. Tan Ngai Paing to deliver his talk. Dr. Tan, the floor is yours. Thank you.
You're most too kind, Dr. Firdaus. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. So, Dr. Firdaus, before I start my presentation or webinar, just to, can you just double check with me if my screen is okay? So, I'm now entering slide, both beginning of the slide. Yes, can you see my slides? Boleh nampak? Okay, yes. All right. So good morning, everyone. So for today, my topic is actually quite simple. Know your fertilizer. And so when I was being approached to give a title on the webinar, I found out that most of the time today we tend to we are being surrounded with a lot of information, whether whether the information has been validated or whether the information is false. In particular, in terms of the food safety, that we are food safety from what we eat. So one of the things that people always aware or worry of being skeptical are the how the food is being produced. And me being involved in this agriculture research and agriculture education, I think there's a need for us to really understand, how does all this agriculture input actually helps us or help us to produce food, and what are they actually? So over the months of the webinar that was being conducted by the faculty and the department, we have various topics, and I picked this topic. And for other topic, don't forget to go through our Facebook. You can look back some of our previous colleague webinars on Facebook and others, the webinar as well in our YouTube channel for the Department of Land Management. So without further ado, so why do we need fertilizer? Why do we need fertilizer? So we need fertilizers because we need to fertilize our soil. But how good is our soil? So here we are being presented a map. This map is from the FAO. FAO is the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. So FAO, he put a lot of emphasis on black soil. So what exactly is black soil? So black soil are soil that is blessed from Mother Nature that is rich in organic matter and very fertile. And you can see here the black soil, the black soil which is a brownish color. It is much more occur in areas like over here in the North America, over the Latin America, somewhere around here, and of course in the Russia and Ukraine region. So some of you might question that. Some of you might notice that recently there's been surge in food prices all around the world. And most of the time is because we are now living in a globalization era. The food production chain will be the global food production chain will be influenced positively or negatively if one of the major country that food exporter is being disrupted. The process of exporting the food produced. So this is particular true, right? For example, in Russia and also Ukraine. So those countries, they produce a lot of wheat. Yeah, and then what happened was, because of the military crisis that's happened over there. So ultimately, prices of food becomes surge, and then food also tend to become scarce. Yeah. So for other soil, so non-black soil. So what are non-black soils? Non-black soils are soil that is still good soils to grow food, but most of the time these soils, the performance is not as good as it is. It's not good as compared to black soil, because black soil is very high organic matter and it's very fertile. But black soil, non-black soil, you need to put a little bit of effort into it. So looking back at our Malaysian soil, so you can see Malaysian soil, normally we don't have the so-called black soil as shown by the FAO, even though it's very, very little, even if there is. This is because of the climate, the climate of Malaysia. So our Malaysian climate is very hot and humid. So very hot and humid. So there's a lot of rain. We are talking about 2,000 millimeters or more annually. And then, and if you look at recently, especially in the west coast of Malaysia or east coast, during the end of the year, we have a very low rainfall. I mean, we have a very high rainfall, which resulted in flood. And all this, a lot of rain, plus very hot, hot and humid. Our soils tend to be weathered very quickly. So tend to be very weathered, and resulted the soil is low in plant nutrient, low in the organic matter, because oxidization tends to happen more when it's hot and humid. So the organic matter tends to oxidize much more faster. And of course, because we leach out naturally the plant nutrient from the soil, and then our soil tends to be acidic. Yeah, so you can see this is a map from the Department of Agriculture. So according to the Department of Agriculture, 53% of the Malaysian soil are classified to be suitable for agriculture. So we have marginal lands, including peat soil and acid sulfate soil, as well as beach soil. And others are unsuitable due to steep land. So apart from marginal soil, marginal land, peat soil, we won't discuss about that. 53% is suitable for agriculture. But most of the time, like I mentioned, the inherent fertility, inherent fertility means the fertility as it is not as fertile as compared to some other countries like those who have black soil. So we need excess of agriculture, excess of fertilizer to really make our plant to grow. So this is where fertilizer came into play. That helps us. So although our soil, but one thing I want to say is that although Malaysia or some many other tropical countries, we are not blessed with very fertile soil, but we have all year round of rainfall and all year round of sunlight. As compared to countries which has temperate climate, you can only do agriculture maximums about like maybe 4 months or 5 months tops. But other than that, you would have during the winter or during the autumn seasons, which you cannot plant anything. So let's go on. So people have understand, yeah. So understand the use of they understand the infertility of the land after it's being grown with crops. And this is particularly true if you look at Malaysia. If you look at our Sarawak, we have our Iban community. So they will have these. They produce these slash and burn practices. So this slash and burn is one of the way of introducing a fertilizer to the soil. But before that, before when we look at into the history through carbon dating or nitrogen 15 research, we can find out that back in the ancient times, more than 8,000 years ago, manure was being used to fertilize the soil. So this shows, if you can see the pictures on the left, the barley. So barley left and wheat from farming side more than 8,000 years ago. So more than 8,000 years ago, people have started to use manure to make the plant grow better. Now this was done because according to the research, this was done using the nitrogen 15 or comparing the carbon as well as the nitrogen present and past. So what is 8,000 years ago? 8,000 years ago, it would be like almost the beginning of the civilization as we know it. The Chinese civilization started more than 5,000 years ago, if I remember correctly. So even before that, people have known that using manure, meaning to say manure can be any excretion from any animal, including human alone, can ultimately improve the plant growth rather than just putting in the soil and let it just to grow. Yeah, and then also manure can also be used as a fuel and heat for building materials. I think some of the this one is still being practiced, I would say, especially for cow dung. Yeah, cow dung, we can burn cow dung for fuel for heat as well as using cow dung for building materials. One is hardened. And then in terms of, if you look at China also, if you look at China, human waste has always been collected in China for centuries. And these are because in the olden days when sewage system is not so advanced or not well established, people tend to collect all these nocturnal fragrance. If you look at sometimes the movies, they call it in Mandarin, they call it ye heon, in Cantonese. So this one they are also being used to fertilize the field. But even today, apart from the hygiene, people are afraid of the hygiene, but still there are some places still use human waste as one of their way to fertilize the field. Later we will discuss why waste can be used as a fertilizer. So over the years, for thousands of years, people have known to use a manure. And then what really triggered the modern fertilizer, or what really happened before the nitrogen fertilizers is being developed or being found by scientists, is the story of a Peruvian guano. So what happened was, in manure is something that's good, but you need to collect it. So what are the things that can be what are the other things that can be added to the soil? So you have to understand the modern fertilizer that we have today, like the NPK that you can buy easily anywhere, even in supermarket, or even in supermarket, or in anywhere. It's only has developed for less than for I think would be 100 years, 100 over years. But before that, people are still not very clear why you put organic matter, why you put something it will help to grow the trees or plant, make it much more stronger and make the land much more fertile. So during the previous centuries, before the 20th centuries, people, the Western civilization has done a lot of traveling and exploring, and they came to this Peruvian countries, Peru, which is just the Latin America, and over the Peru, the Chincha Islands, there's a lot of deposit of manure. So this deposit of manure actually came from the seabird. So this seabird, what happened was, so there was this area has a large marine ecosystem because of the area and also how the flow, the tide flow, the tide flow of the area in this Chincha Island, that would attracted a lot of fishes and all of seafood over there, and ultimately a lot of birds feed on the feed and also prey on this seafood over this area. And then of course you see, it always happened to my car as well. Every morning they always found some poo on top of your car. The same thing. After the birds feed on the fishes and also the seafood, they'll leave poo in the island. And then of course this island, because of the climate as well, and also very specific geological location that it is, the things tend to dry up very quickly. So it's not washed away, it's not being rainfalling come in and wash away, no, but it dried up. So when it dried up, the manure becomes dried up layer by layer, and ultimately it becomes something like a mine. So they call it a guano mine. So what's so special about this guano? Because when the birds feed something that is nutritious, something like seafood, fish, maybe some shrimps, I don't know, of fish. So the fish itself is rich in nitrogen and very nutritious type of protein. When the poo is being deposited, the poo itself also contains a significantly higher level of nitrogen and phosphorus as compared to other poo or manure that's produced by other beings. So actually there is differences. Not all poo is the same. It's a bit disgusting, but that's the fact. So this doctor, Justin von Liebig, so noted that guano as potential guano as a fertilizer. It's is noted that this guano can increase use. So this gentleman over here is Justus von Liebig. He's a German scientist, if I'm not mistaken. So he's a very important person in our soil science and all this agronomy and plant science, because he's the one that really tells us about plant nutrients and how plant nutrients limit the potential growth of the tree. And once his research, or once people observe, has been known by everyone, everyone was flooding those Chincha Islands to mine all this guano. So this guano was so valuable because it's high in nitrogen and phosphorus. Yeah, it's high in nitrogen and phosphorus. Once you mine it, and then when you put it in the soil, it's like magic. It's like magic. It's not like another manure or poo. It's not like any ordinary cow dung. It's so fertile that it can make your crop grow very, very well. So everyone was chasing over it. So ultimately, Even wars was being ultimately war were being fought, on the Chincha Islands War. And then if you look at the history, there's even the United States. They passed a Guano Island Act, which they can claim the island uh, if the island is not inhabited or it does not belong to anyone to claim for the guano. It is so precious, and for during that particular period of time, during the end of 19th century, that this guano has really produced to improve the production and increase the population, at least in the Western civilization. So just a little bit of the pictures of the guano. You can see here, if you look at some of the history of Peruvian guano, you can see some of the pictures that people mine for the guano. The guano stack as if it's in mountain. You can see the birds that is gather those area, and it is so much, so much bird, so much seafood, and so much pool that this guano mine or this guano deposit has present itself to the world. So as a matter of fact, if you look at this old poster over here, people soluble Pacific guano, corn, potatoes, tobacco. And then even Peruvian guano was even once called the white gold, $76 per pound back in the late 19th century, which is a quarter of the price of the gold back then. So this is how important when we're entering the new we're entering this 20th century, that producing food is so important, that we understand that the production of food is not capable unless we put something into the soil to make the soil grow better. So this is just some of the information on some research that I've found, and then they will look at the effect of guano on soil. If you look at here, if you look at the soil, you can look at the nitrate, ammonium, phosphate, and potassium. These are some of the important element that is required for the plant to grow. So you can look at here, what it says here, the distance to shore. If you look at the distance to shore, the concentration of NPK is much more higher as is compared to further to the shore. So this shows that, the guano actually fertilize the shore. I mean, next to the shore, in terms of the concentration of the plant nutrients. So, but Peruvian islands, Chincha Islands are very small area, and the way the thing that the speed of the birds, the seabirds over there to pull and to dry up and to deposit is never going to catch up with the demand and also the desire of the world. So what happened then? Peruvian people fought again, and then the price becomes so expensive, and then it's getting depleting. So what are the things that we can do apart from the traditional manure that you have, Peruvian manure? So this is where we come to the dawn of modern fertilizer. So this is where, the Haber-Bosch process is one of the most important, I would say the most important formula that happened to the mankind in the 20th century. So you can look at here, just a simple chemistry equation that we learned, many years ago during your childhood, or when you were doing secondary school, high school. You see nitrogen, N2 plus hydrogen, and then you get ammonia. A very simple exothermic reaction. But you have to understand, many years ago, nitrogen was how are you going to break the nitrogen? Everyone knows nitrogen is a very strong bond. It has a triple bond. It's a triple bond is bound by a 2 pi bond and 1 sigma bond. So to break this triple bond, it's very difficult. So of course, scientists like Fritz Haber, using the principle of Le Chatelier, he finally figured out how to make ammonia. So NH3 is ammonia. So ammonia is one of the key components of the modern nitrogen fertilizer that we have. And then if you look at the hydrogen, the source from hydrogen is from methane of natural gas. So that is why many of the countries nowadays who is able to produce oil and gases, normally they will work into producing ammonia as well, more specifically urea, to produce nitrogen fertilizer, because these formula require people to really use a lot of energy, breaking the bond, letting the electrons to reconfigure to become ammonia finally. So it takes a lot of energy. So how important is the ammonia? Okay, you can look at, so once the Haber and Bosch processes has been improved. Actually, they were being awarded the Nobel Prize for that. Because a simple formula, everyone can write a formula, but how are you going to do it? That is the challenges in chemistry. What kind of things how are you going to break the bond and rearrange and reconfigure? It's very important. So it was a magic formula. Human was finally able to grow food out of air. The nitrogen fertilizer that we use actually from the air. And this ammonia is being used in the urea fertilizers. And then ammonia also being used in the manufacture of plastics, explosives, textile, pesticide, and cleaning solution. So I think all of you we are going through or we are still going through the COVID scenario, the situation. I see many of us, we will either choose two types of sanitizing agent. One is a 70% alcohol, 75%, or 65%. And the other one, when you look at the active ingredient, is called QAC. What is QAC? Quaternary ammonium compound. So that also comes from ammonia. So when you are doing experiment with nitrogen, don't use quaternary ammonium compound or cleaning agent, to do it. Otherwise, you have contamination in your nitrogen experiment. Okay, back to ammonia. So because world population, so this is a projection. If you see the ammonia, without ammonia, we cannot support how much people we can support. We can only support like 2 to 3 billion people. But because of the ammonia fertilizer, synthetically ammonium fertilizer, synthetically nitrogen, we were able to feed the current population up to 7 billion. So imagine Haber Bosch was never there. He was never born, or nobody cares about it. So we won't be having so much population nowadays, or should I say the population would not have grown as today. Just like if you look at if you want to relate to popular culture, maybe it's the infinity gauntlet. You could snap the population into half. So this is what happened. Without this nitrogen fertilizer, the population will be half as compared to what we are living in at the present moment. So now we know nitrogen fertilizer. So this is the background of it. So what are the nitrogen fertilizers? So nitrogen fertilizers is nothing magic about it. So for nitrogen fertilizers, we have to know first what exactly are the nitrogen form that is being taken up by the plant. So basically, there's two forms, ammonium and nitrate. Yeah, ammonium is NH4 plus, nitrate is NO3 minus. So any types of nitrogen giving fertilizers, let it be organic, inorganic, or manure, ultimately it has to change into either in ammonium form or in nitrate form. It's only this ammonium and nitrate form can be taken up by the plant because the plant has the roots of the plant a special transporter specifically for ammonium and nitrate to really to accept the nitrate and to assimilate this nitrate and also ammonium into the protein synthesis of the plant per se. So ammonium-based fertilizers, we have ammonium chloride, we have ammonium nitrate, and ammonium sulfate. We have urea fertilizers, nitrate fertilizers, ammonium nitrate fertilizers, calcium nitrate, and potassium nitrate. These are some of the common fertilizers that we have seen today. Most of the time, I found that sometimes in Malaysia, we don't have a very clear regulation in terms of labeling the form of the nitrogen fertilizers. So this is a bit of, sometimes I would say, a bit of a miss, if I were to say, or, it's a bit sorry, to not to see what kind of nitrogen that you're putting. But most of the time, if you buy all these straight fertilizer, you will know, especially for like oil palm plantation, they always like to use ammonium chloride. Last time they used to use ammonium sulfate. And for plant trees, crop trees, orchard trees, sorry, mostly they like to use much more premium nitrogen fertilizers such as calcium nitrate and potassium nitrate, which is quite popular. So nitrogen fertilizer is it's very good. It can result in the exponential growth of your tree, if I can say that. But if you put too much nitrogen fertilizers, what will happen? Two things. Water pollution, three things, sorry. Water pollution. When the water pollution nitrate goes into the river and groundwater and you drink it, it's very bad for the human. Emission of nitrous oxide. So these are some of the things that agriculture also put a lot of emphasis on the research. The nitrous oxide in the air is actually the greenhouse gases, which is about 250 to 300 times the magnitude of carbon dioxide in terms of greenhouse gas effect. And it's a very potent greenhouse gas, so we try to reduce it, or how we going to reduce it so that we don't have all this kind of global warming. But I think most of you will understand that the soil acidification of fertilizer. Actually, not all fertilizer acidify the soil, only a certain. And one of the fertilizers are ammonium fertilizers. Because as you can see in this formula, anyone who studied chemistry will know if hydrogen is being produced or something like this, nitrate or sulfuric acid, it will have an acidifying effect. So, but to be fair, ammonium turning into nitrate, this is what we call nitrification, and the process of releasing protons, hydrogen proton in particular, is a natural process. But this process is natural, but it will become a problem when we apply too much fertilizers, and those fertilizers is not being taken up by the plant, and ultimately it goes through nitrification process, and it releases the hydrogen ions, which is acidifying. So that is about nitrogen fertilizer. So nitrogen fertilizers normally it requires in a much, if you look at plant science, it requires in the largest quantity as compared to other nutrients. Other nutrients such as phosphorus, here we will look at. But what about phosphorus? Phosphorus is also a very important nutrient to grow trees. It is found in our DNA. It is very important for the ATP. And where does this phosphorus come from? We don't make phosphorus. We make nitrogen from the air, but we don't make phosphorus synthetically. Actually, we mine phosphorus. So this is a picture of the mine that I visited in Morocco a few years ago with my colleague and my professors. This is a phosphate mine. So as you can see here, phosphorus mine only occurs in a few areas. If you look at this picture over here, there's a graph of pictures over here. You can see the phosphate is being located over the Northern America, somewhere in Canada. A lot of here in the Northern Africa, some in China, and some of the Southern Africa. So this is a mine, just like your oil and gas. You mine it and you use it, and it's finished. So it's a finite resources. So this phosphate rock, it is rich in phosphorus. And this phosphate is normally in mine, and what normally we would go through a process, we would turn it into phosphoric acid. And phosphoric acid, you can do a lot of things. And one of the things you can do water-soluble fertilizers or other raw materials. And number four, in Malaysia in particular, because we have acidic soil, normally once we mine the phosphate rocks, given the reactive nature of the particular phosphate appetite, we can actually apply it to the acidic soil. It will dissolve slowly. As a matter of fact, this is some of the research that I've been conducting. Why we want to use, why we don't want to further process into phosphoric acid, there's a lot of things that we need to look at, because in terms of economy scale, we don't need to go through other processes. In terms of carbon footprint, you reduce the carbon footprint. And thirdly, if you apply phosphate rock into the soil, normally it's a much more slow effect as compared to water-soluble soil. So, types of phosphate fertilizers. Now, phosphorus uptake by plant in orthophosphate form. In chemistry form is something like H2PO4, H2PO4. And then similarly, regardless, your source is a organic, inorganic, manure. At the end of the day, the phosphate to be taken has to be orthophosphate form to be taken up by the plant root system generally and overall. So there are two types of, when you buy a phosphate fertilizer, there are two types of things. One is a phosphate rock and one is a water-soluble P. Many of the farmers, I think they will be very aware of the water-soluble P. And some of you are also aware what is phosphate rock. So what's the difference? So the difference of phosphate rock and water-soluble P is that water-soluble P tend to be much more fast-acting. And it's very suitable for short-term crops. Crops like vegetables, where you can harvest in 60 days or even shorter times like 30 days or few months. And phosphate rock is much more suitable for perennial crops, something like oil palm, rubber, or even if you have a tree that can grow many, many years, you can use phosphate rock. So it's much more slow acting, and it also can, but it can only be applied to soil which is acidic. So when you buy a fertilizer, make sure you know what you need to add, whether there's a water-soluble P or some phosphate rock. So of course, excessive use of phosphate fertilizer, this also happened, people use a lot of phosphate, resulting in water pollution, which cause the death of fish and plants, and also making our water undrinkable. So again, there's another very important in the NPK, potassium K or gallium is also a mine product. a resource that you can mine. And the biggest mine of potassium is in Russia and Canada. So you could imagine with Russia and, with the military crisis happening, in this, previous Soviet Union area, as Russia, it affects the flow of potassium fertilizers. These potassium fertilizers is also being mined like phosphate, but they are much more concentrated and they are only in Russia and Canada. And once, if you go to an agriculture shop, normally you would say they will sell you something like an MOP. What exactly is MOP? MOP is called muriate of potash. You can say this is a muriate of potash. So the percentage of KCl is very, very high. The potential, the content of potassium is very high, very high. With a potassium of 50% or K2 of 60%, this can be a very good source of K for the plant. And K, muriate of potash, in this chemical form is KCl. And everyone knows KCl is a very soluble, substance. So when you apply to it, it can be quickly taken up by the plant. So potassium uptake in plants is only in ion K. So once the potassium it dissociates in the soil solution, it will become positive and negative. So it can be taken up by the plant immediately. So you can see, so potassium, in Malaysia, we use a lot of potassium. This is particularly true for oil palm. We are talking about sometimes more than 2 kilo of K per tree per year. So we rely heavily on the import of potassium sources from Canada and Russia. So when we know our fertilizers, if you know how to use your fertilizers carefully, what are the things that you need to look at? Some of the things that we need to look at is the soil pH. So here you can see a world map of the soil pH. So what is the pH of the world looks like? Normally, our pH is a bit acidic. All around the world is a bit acidic. And for the case of Malaysia, as I mentioned to you, because our weather conditions and also our climate, our soil tends to be much more acidic. Unless you are in limestone areas such as Batu Caves, in Perak, Ipoh area, the pH will be much higher. But overall, you would have a pH about 4 to 5 something. But how does pH influence the availability of plant nutrient? So for NPK, normally plant is much more, they are much more able to uptake the nutrient NPK in a slightly acidic condition. Anything between 5 to 6, it will uptake better. So if we were to put the fertilizers and the soil is too acidic, it would decrease the uptake of the plant. Despite you are putting so much fertilizer. So pH plays a very important role when you apply your fertilizers to ensure the efficiency of the nutrient per se. So what can you do to improve the plant, the soil pH, and also the soil quality? A fertilizer will work its best if the soil is in a tip-top condition, if the quality of the soil is good. So one of the things that we like to put is organic manure, or most of the time you call it organic fertilizer. But organic fertilizer sometimes is a bit confusing. So sometimes I don't like to use the term organic fertilizer. I like to use organic manure because it actually represents what we are trying to do or say in this particular context. So organic manure, or sometimes we call compost, it can be two sources, animal or plant source. So whether you want to add animal or plant source, for me, there is not much of a problem. But one of the most important thing when you select your compost or your organic manure, or you want to say it's organic fertilizer, you have to make sure the the material is fully composted. So it doesn't still have the smell of it doesn't have a foul smell of the rotten animal or rotten plant. So if it's composted, even it's animal or plant, normally they are as good as it is. But most of the time, uh, the compost in our Malaysia, sometimes we can see some sources are not so well composted. That resulted some people would prefer a plant rather than an animal. But like I say, if the quality, if the material has been fully composted, it shouldn't. This kind of problem shouldn't arise in terms of the differences of the sources. So organic manure, what does it helps? It helps better water retention, nutrient retention, promote better soil structure, better microbial activities, and improve soil pH. So it improve the soil pH because organic matter, it can form a complex with all this aluminum, to suppress the release of hydrogen ion. And also, so you can see here, the main function is not to produce, to give you NPK, but more to condition your soil. Yeah, condition the soil that is better in terms of pH, water retention, nutrient retention. But it does contain a trace amount or small amount of NPK. Normally, cumulatively, it's not more than, I would say, not more than 10%. Not more than that, but 5-6% maximum. So, but these plant nutrients can only be released slowly. So by using only organic manure, sometimes you don't see your plant doesn't grow as fast if you don't mix it with some fertilizer. Well, that is normal because, like I said, the NPK level is much more lower. So in order to improve the performance of plants, normally what we can do is we add the organic manure, add a pinch of NPK fertilizers and a little bit of chemical fertilizer, some minerals, and it can definitely improve the plant better. Not because of hormone or whatever, it's just simple science, elemental science. So the differences between organic and inorganic fertilizers. Organic fertilizers, manure, compost are practically the same thing that we are talking about. Generally, organic matter that contain plant nutrients. The NPK is rarely more than 10%. And if you look at, sometimes when you look at some shops sell you 888 organic fertilizers, practically these are not completely pure manure or whatever. These are fertilizers. These are compost added with some fertilizers. Some you mix it sometimes with a bit of urea, phosphate rock, or potassium. But it's not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing. But if you're really about like fully manure, so no, it's not a fully organic. Nutrient levels of organic fertilizers are generally slow. Nutrient release are generally low, and their release is slow. Yeah, and then these organic compound I mentioned, it has to be break down into elemental form to be taken up by the plant roots, either in ammonium, orthophosphate, or iron care. The same for fertilizers. It has to be this kind of form, ammonium or nitrate, orthophosphate or potassium, iron potassium. So the inorganic fertilizers are normally minerals that are mined, potassium and also phosphorus in particular, or synthesized, like I mentioned to you, the synthesis of ammonia and urea. And also the differences between this inorganic fertilizer is normally you need to have a small amount to make it grow. If you compare the relationship between the organic compost, the compost that you put, and the inorganic fertilizer that you put, maybe the ratio will be much more smaller because they are nutrients, and then once they dissolve, they can grow very fast. And then excessive use will result in pollution in soil salinity. So this is what happens if you use too much fertilizer. It will cause a lot of pollution because it's too much nutrient, just like a nitrate, yeah, and also phosphorus. So what can we do? So a good practice would always incorporate manure with inorganic fertilizer or compost with inorganic fertilizers. What happened is the manure will improve the soil quality, while the inorganic fertilizers will enrich the soil with the plant nutrients required. And it is much more balanced and sustainable environment for plant growth. So finally, after we have talked about some the history and also what are the form and function of the fertilizers, it's a very general, but I think it's very important to let people know to think about uh, uh, how does the fertilizers affect the world, and not just like thinking it's something to be hazardous or to be not fit and we should stay away from it. But as a matter of fact, after we know the origin of the fertilizers, um, we know that um, out of the 1.7 billion in the 19th, during the early 20th centuries, up to 7 billion people that are living on this planet Earth. Without a surplus of food, without from the contribution of fertilizers, yeah, nothing can progress. Culture, technology, religion, uh, probably we're still many, many years behind in terms of technology. Probably won't have Wi-Fi. And then fertilizers are finite resources that cannot be renewed. It is mined or synthesized using energy, even though there's a lot of air or nitrogen in the air. But once we mine out our, natural gas, it will be very maybe in terms of economically scale, it will be very not profitable or not viable to produce ammonia in that way. And because of that, we need to have a good understanding, a correct understanding in the fertilizers so that we can grow food in a much more sustainable manner, uh, in economically, socially, as well as environmentally. So that is my take-home message for everyone. So it's a very bit general my presentation, but I think this is the first time we talk about it, and probably in the coming webinar, maybe next year, we can have something much more advanced, or even a workshop. So that will be my web presentation. So can I pass back the floor to Dr. Fidels?
Okay, all right. So, thank you, Dr. Tan, for his remarkable and interesting talk about fertilizer for nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and not to mention the organic as well. So, know your fertilizer, given by Dr. Tan Ngai Paing to everyone. Thank you. So, okay, all right. I think we can move on into our Q&A session. So, let's see our first questions here. What do we have here? Right. So from Dr. Christopher, since P and K fertilizers are produced from mining these elements, does this mean chemical fertilizers are unsustainable? Should we then switch to organic fertilizers? Right. So Dr. Tan, please.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Um, Well, I won't say it's unsustainable. It is how we approach these uh, elements, how it's being used is much more important. The same thing when we have all these nowadays we are practically everything that we have today, even our computer, are coming from elements that is mined from somewhere, lanthanides, the electric cars that you have. But it will be an approach of how we use. That's why our approach is much more in terms of the sustainable use and how we are going to reduce the wastage by reducing the excessive application of fertilizer, by understanding the life cycle of um, the plant and to provide the plant in a much more a position manner. That's what we position agriculture that will happen. Yeah, to to really save up the the elements that is that's finite in the world for our next generation. And for the organic fertilizer, although organic fertilizers they have traces of phosphorus and potassium, given the global population and then the diversity of the food that we need to produce. Furthermore, with the land area that we are being limited, it is sad to say the P and K uh, cannot solely be fulfilled by the use of organic fertilizers. Of course, one of the good example that was happened is because, for example, in one of the countries, for example, in Sri Lanka, um, if you look at the news, there was people talking about the countries once they did the organic fertilizers, but it resulted the sharp decrease in terms of the crop produced. So because the organic fertilizer, while it's a very good soil conditioning, but if you want to do commercial agriculture where you emphasize in terms of not only in quality but also in quantity, organic fertilizer is just not there to make the cut.
Okay, all right. So, Dr. Tan, maybe I can add a little bit here.
Sure.
So, is it possible if we find an alternative rather than depending solely on the mining of these elements? Alternatives such as like sewage sludge, we can extract P, banana leaf, we can extract K, but then we need the technology, right, Dr. Tan? Is it possible?
Yes, yes. There are sources that we can recover the elements. This is all in terms of sustainable management. This is particularly true, for example, happening in our oil palm industry, where we try to recycle the palm oil mill effluent, where it contains a significantly higher level of potassium that we can reuse for our crop.
Okay, all right. Okay, Dr. Tan. So maybe we can move into our next questions. What do we have here? Right. Okay, from Dr. Chris as well. How can urban gardeners choose between the so many fertilizers available in the market today?
It's a very general question. But what I can say is you have to look at the label. You have to read the label. Don't don't just believe that. Just don't look at when I see when I mention the label. We don't mean by just we don't look at only like, oh, it makes your plant grow, oh, faster fruiting. No, what I mean is the label is what is inside the fertilizers. What is the composition of the fertilizers? As I mentioned earlier in my beginning of our webinar, in Malaysia, we are not that uh, the information for fertilizer is sometimes is a bit not so clear for the consumer. So when you buy something, especially when even for me, if I go to the agriculture shop, I need to see the behind. I need to look at the claim. What do you mean by improving the plant growth? Are you talking about biostimulants? Are you talking about higher concentration of P and K, or are you talking about plant growth promoter? So these are the things that we need to understand, and we need to educate ourselves, not like blindly looking at the slogan that how the product is being marketed. So that is very important to look at the label.
Okay, all right. We move on to the next. Yes, from Mr. Billy Tang, sustainable nitrogen management for ecosystem restoration is vital to planetary health. So I think this is true. Maybe Dr. Tan can add some more from your perspective, Dr. Tan, how to
Yeah,
manage.
this looks like an essay for a postgraduate student. Well, now nowadays, nitrogen, of course, nitrogen. When we talk about nitrogen, what I emphasize, what I've shown, is the Haber and Bosch process in terms of the manufacturing of urea, which is very important in the global nitrogen supply for the agriculture. Of course, in terms of nitrogen management, we can also recycle from the plant itself, plant manure, crops itself. So how are we going to use all these kind of resources to balance it out? Like I said, the sustainable, it covers three aspects. Many of the people, they get the wrong idea. Sustainable is always about environment. It is not true. It is always about people, profit, people, and planet. Meaning to say, it's economically, socially, and environmentally. And ultimately, it will lead to a better development. So when we talk about nitrogen source, why would someone pick urea? Why would someone pick ammonium fertilizer? Why would someone pick something like recycling the manure for the nitrogen sources, which is viable, and there's nothing wrong with that. But you have to look at the perspective and also the environment that you are in, the circumstances that you're in. Whether the nitrogen that you apply in the form of manure is able to fulfill the growth of the tree. If it's able to fulfill the growth of the tree or the plant, then it's fine. But you have the other concern when it mixes with others nutrient as well, because when you add too much organic manure, for example, like when you try to emphasize too much on organic manure in terms of supplying the growth of the tree, it might not be able to fulfill the needs of the plant for other nutrients. So yes, sustainable nitrogen management is very crucial. Whether how we select, just like whether we can mix it together, but definitely not mixing urea with organic matter, not mixing urea with compost, for example. Why? Because when you mix urea and compost, normally you have higher volatilization of losses in terms of ammonia gases. That's one thing. Like, don't mix urea with organic matter. Normally, you don't do that. If you want to mix, maybe you can mix it with some ammonium chloride, ammonium sulfate. Dr. Fidels, you know better, no? So, so these are nitrogen. It's very specific. You talk about sustainable nitrogen management. These are very specific things that you have to have very good technical knowledge to understand what you're dealing with.
Okay, all right. Yeah, because it's some people say the compost is kind of hot, so it can trigger the urea. Some people the term as panas and compost ni. Okay, all right. So next we have from Billy Tang as well. I think this is his comment on the explanation given by Dr. Tan. All input must be traceable in ethical farming and environmental health. Yeah. So Dr. Tan, any further comments on this? This is a good comment actually. Yeah.
Yes. Yes, all input, regardless of your organic or inorganic input has to be traceable. For example, where does your manure come from? There are some manure that we can use for plant growth, but for human consumption. But there's some manure that we don't use for human consumption. For example, like sewage sludge. Sewage sludge from our colleague who is working, normally we are using it for ornamentals, trees, but not for human consumption. That, although, if you look at back, if the sewage sludge, in terms of if it's composted, in terms of if you're worried about the safety, it is fully composted, and then the the hazard might not be there, but there was still some people consideration, you see, some moral consideration or preference of people. We can accept manure from cow or chicken, but never manure from human being. So it has to be. It's part of the ethical farming as well. You see, it's it's something that we need to work on, and then a right way of education of people know how to approach this kind of thing.
Yes, I agree with that. And maybe we can explore more to the farmers specifically on the good agricultural practices, GAP. Okay, all right. So we don't have any further questions here, but I do have one question, Dr. Tan. I was wondering, when you talk about the nitrogen just now, the plant taken up the nitrogen in terms of nitrate and also ammonia. So ammonium ion. So is there or was there any research or publication mentioning that what are the degree of the uptake between nitrate and also ammonium? Is there any research or publication mentioning that? The percentage?
Now, we can talk about the general idea about ammonium and nitrate. Both forms can be taken up by the plant, because the plant itself, in the root system, it has the specific transporter to uptake ammonium and nitrate. So this is the key role. But if you ask me, there's a lot of debate actually whether the tree prefers more nitrate or prefer ammonium. Normally nitrate would be much more easier taken up by the plant generally. But it doesn't mean that ammonia is not being taken by the plant. There's a complex reaction or environment that the plant is when it's taking up the nutrient. It also depends on the environment, the rhizosphere environment, whether what kind of pH we are looking at, and what kind of moisture that we are looking at. So these will affect the choices of ammonium or nitrate being taken up by the plant. But if you look at hydroponics normally, if we apply the nitrogen, normally is in the nitrate form. Ammonium form normally is a lower concentration. If you increase the ammonium level in the hydroponic system in the higher form, normally the plant doesn't grow that well. But it doesn't happen in the soil system. You put in the soil, some ammonium goes to the plant, some got lost away, some nitrify, becomes nitrate and taken up by the plant. So it's quite complex.
Okay. All right, Dr. Tan. Thank you for the explanation and clarification. Right. So I don't think that we do have any further questions. We have Billy Tang as well. So, yep. What about nitrogen leaching to our waterways, especially from so many urban farms in Klang Valley?
Yes, that is exactly what I was talking about. Now, leaching. Okay. Now, what can I comment is the correct use of nitrogen is very important. But if you talk about leaching, normally this will associate with the use of nitrate. because nitrate is an ion, is a negative ion. It doesn't really stick with the soil as compared to the ammonium, because the soil is negatively charged. So when you have ammonium, so it can stick to the soil. It's soil science. But in nitrate, because it's a negative charge, normally it tends to leach out much more easy. That is why I think leaching of nitrate, when we talk about nitrogen, normally we talk about nitrate leaching into the waterways. It is quite regulated. As a matter of fact, if you look at the Department of Environment, the water cannot exceed. I think I couldn't remember the figure, but there is a ppm, there is a part per million threshold that you can achieve. Apart from that, if it's achieved, then you can call for, I don't know, maybe it's a court action, or it's a felony, or it's an offense. It is very well regulated in terms of nitrate in the water. As a matter of fact, it's something that we can detect very easily with all these simple kits, even like sensors and things like that. Yeah.
And I think monitoring is important here. I think, Dr. Tan, right? Okay, right. So we move on into our last questions, perhaps, from Nicholas Tan. Right. So what would be your recommendations for the treatment of sludge from human waste as a use for organic fertilizers? Dr. Tan, please.
Yeah, actually, it is something that has lived with us so long, and then as I mentioned earlier, like the membrane. So this will be the last question. Right? I think we're running out of time.
Yes,
But I'll
yes.
answer this question anyway. We call it ye hiong. Ye hiong is a Cantonese word. Yeah, there's nothing wrong, but it's a moral, it's a perception. It's a perception. Human being that we don't want to use it as a. We don't want to exist in our supply chain, in our food production. But technically and scientific and historically speaking, if you want to use sludge from human waste as organic fertilizers, you can use it, but you need to compost it. You need to go through a composting processes. Okay, you need to go through a composting processes just like any other manure. Once it go through a composting processes, one is fully composted, then the material would be fit for application in the field. But of course, being a responsible, like I say, ethical farming, yeah, you have to inform. You have to inform your consumer what kind of organic fertilizer you're using. You have to inform, unless you use it on your own. But then again, you have to inform your family members.
Yes,
Yeah?
yes. So this is what we call what you give, you get back, Dr. Tan.
I don't think your wife will be agree with you.
Okay, all right. So I think that was our last questions. Okay, for this today's webinar. Okay, before we close our interesting and remarkable of discussion today together with Dr. Tan, I thank you all for being here today and taking the time to patiently listen to our webinar today, delivered by Dr. Tan Ngai Paing. And I wish you all a blessed day. Right. So thank you. I think we can close our talk today, our
Thank
webinar.
you, Dr. Firdaus.
Okay.
Thank you,
All right.
Firdaus.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.